Hello everyone and welcome to our second Early Excellence Roundtable. Today we're going to be focusing on looking at 2 to 3 year old provision and answering some of the questions that a lot of you have put out on social media. I'm Claire King, a curriculum consultant from Early Excellence, and I'm joined by my colleagues. I'll hand over to introduce themselves. Andy?
Yes, hello. My name is Andy Burt. I work for Early Excellence as a curriculum consultant. As part of my role, I do a wide variety of different things, leading training, both online and face-to-face, but also room planning, so room design and outdoor design. Alongside that, also consultancy visits and work on digital media.
Over to you, Phil.
Hello, hi, I'm Phil Armstrong. I'm also part of the curriculum and strategic team at Early Excellence. I'm Senior Education Lead and International Services Lead. And with regard to the 2-year-old conversation we're having today, I developed our guide to continuous vision planning for 2 to 3 year olds as well. It's part of my role.
Super. And last but not least, Matthew.
Yep, hi, I'm Matthew. I'm a curriculum consultant at Early Excellence as well. My role is very similar to Andy and Claire, to be honest, without the digital side of things.
Well, it's been really great to be able to read some of the questions and comments that we've seen across our social media platforms. So we'll make a start and try and answer them the best we can. So one of the first questions that we've had in across our social media platforms is that a school have already got a nursery provision set up. So they've already got 3 to 4 year olds, and they're looking to extend the offer to incorporate 2-year-olds into their provision. So the question really is stemming from where do they start? If they want to introduce 2-year-olds into their setting, where would they start? Phil, do you want to start by answering this one for us?
Yeah, no problem. I think the first thing people need to pause and think about is ask why. Why are you doing that? What's the vision behind it? Sometimes people get really excited about new initiatives, and working with 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds is fantastic, speaking from personal experience. But I think it's really making sure why everybody wants to do this, and that kind of vision exercise I think is really important. Talking to all stakeholders, getting everybody involved in the school community and that wider community. Also, if you're thinking of expanding it as part of the government initiative, of course you need to have conversations with your local authority as well as part of that. Also going and visiting other schools that have got 2 and 3 year old provision I think is invaluable, because they'll be able to share their experiences with you and the kind of challenges and opportunities along the way. But I think building that real deep understanding of the rationale behind, that's going to help you when you start to make those more kind of formal plans to move things forward.
Yeah, definitely. Getting that research done first of all, isn't it? It's going to be so important.
The only thing I'd say is just a little, just go kind of building on what Phil was saying. I think you need to read before you make a decision about. I know you talked about research, but seriously think about the difference between 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. Do your research, read everything that you can, get yourself on some training, get yourself some literature. Like Phil said, visit as many places as you can, because it's different, isn't it? And you need to kind of think really carefully about skill, if you're not already skilling yourself up about 2-year-olds, what they need, what they're like, whether you're going to be able to provide that, whether you have the skills in the team, and read. I think.
Yeah, I think that's great
advice. I
advice.
also think, just to add to that as well, I think there needs to be a good need when you think about the community of the school and the community that the school serves. That often the reasons for having that 2-year-old provision is to really make sure that we're getting in there early when building those relationships with family early. We know how important that is, but also to really support in a very holistic way, support the child, support the families for the school. And I think if when you think about your own school setting and the needs of your families, if that's a good fit for you, then absolutely, then it's important, it's rewarding. There are so many possibilities and positives from it, but you've got to be going into it with the right reasons, as Phil said.
Definitely comes back to that why that Phil mentioned, isn't it?
Yeah.
Having that clear rationale really and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super. Well, let's move on to the second question, which sort of touch on a little bit what Matthew said around having the skill set, but this relates a little bit more to the qualifications. So someone asked around what stipulations would there be put in place regarding qualifications for working with 2-year-olds. Andy, do you want to start us off on that one?
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, the best place to signpost people to is the statutory guidance. So within the statutory guidance, if you go through that, if you're looking into having 2-year-old provision within your school setting, then go to the statutory guidance, really get to know it. As we've already mentioned, the needs of children, of 2-year-old children are different, of course, and need to be different, and we need to acknowledge that. Therefore, in terms of the adults who are supporting those children, those adults need to really be clear about their role, but also we need to be clear about the safety aspect of it too, in terms of the numbers of adults and the space that we're using, and the possibilities of that space. So yes, the statutory guidance that would be where I would signpost people to.
Super. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, I think just to echo Andy there, I think it's also the supporting documents that go alongside in terms of qualifications. So there's, and they keep on changing. I think that's the challenge for anyone in particularly in school leadership position, is all of those DFE documentation evolve over time. And we've obviously had recent changes, particularly around the ratios for 2-year-olds and the qualifications in terms of GCSE maths, for example. And there is a sense that that will continue to evolve. There's also the pathway to level 3 that's changed as well. All these little nuances that are difficult to keep abreast of sometimes. So I think making sure that if you're not aware of it, talking to either people who can advise in your multi-academy trust or local authority and drawing on their advice. But I think, as we probably will talk a lot through this conversation, it's fundamentally the expertise of the adults working directly with the children that's going to be critical. And I love those enthusiastic teachers, you know, who are like, oh, I want to work with the 2 and 3-year-olds. They're brilliant. But always I'm kind of like, who's helping them with their knowledge? So anybody who's going to be working with that team, it is very different. It's fantastic, but it is different. And we need to make sure that we've got the best people in those places. But yeah, the statutory guidance, obviously, we need to make sure we're fulfilling that. And there's lots and lots of stuff on the DFE website, but again, and also actually on our website, on the Ideas and Inspiration tab, you'll find all the latest policies and frameworks and things we refer to keep an eye on as they evolve on an almost weekly basis, it feels like sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point to make, isn't it? Around keeping up to date with the latest framework or any guidance, really. And I know on our website, on earlyexcellence.com, we do have that live link to the DFE as well as Ofsted. So that will help keep people as updated as possible with those many changes that keep occurring.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing just to say there as well is that the qualifications are also, they're a bottom line to a certain extent. You know, they're to kind of quote Julian Grenier, the floor, not the ceiling, in terms of actually what's expected. You know, yes, we need to have the right staff who are qualified, but at the same time, it's what's beyond those qualifications that is key, isn't it? It's the skills that go with that, and the knowledge, the understanding, the attributes. You know, whether actually that, when you think about the needs of your children coming into your 2-year-old provision, have you got the staff who will be able to meet those needs? Whether we're talking about in terms of relationships, whether we're talking about in terms of knowledge of child development, or whatever it might be, you know, a wide range of different skills, then actually we've got to consider that breadth, really, not just the qualification, but of course the qualification will come first.
Super. Sound advice. Really interesting that we've had a message on our social media from a head teacher. So great to be able to connect with head teachers too, because we know this is not just a practitioner or teacher level. And we said before, you know, it really is important to do that sound research first. So this head teacher is saying, I'm a head teacher in schools, have our 3 to 4-year-old provision, but we are now thinking about extending that into accommodating 2-year-olds. So extending that to 2 to 3-year-old provision. So as a head teacher, what advice would we give to that head teacher thinking about implementing or incorporating 2-year-olds, into our provision? Phil, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think it's really great they're asking. Really, really great. And this breaks down to lots of different aspects. We've already touched on that vision. Why are you doing it? But also we know there's a really powerful influence that leadership has on quality of practice. And when we're thinking about early years education, we're thinking about that kind of structural quality. So things like what's the space going to be like for the children? What are the statutory requirements? All those things that are perhaps almost more straightforward from a leadership perspective. But the bit that perhaps is more challenging is that process quality. So what is really good pedagogy and practice for working with young children? And we know that for many head teachers, early years is not their natural habitat. It's like they may have predominantly perhaps worked in Key Stage 2, or maybe familiar more with reception and less so with the younger phases of the EYFS. So it's really starting to pick what is the kind of core knowledge that as a head teacher I need to know in terms of quality. And that's why I think, as we mentioned earlier on, talking to someone else who's done it, I think is a really good starting point. Working with your early years lead in partnership, really, really important. It's such a relationship of trust. It's interesting, some of the work that Julie Fisher did looking at using early years sort of pedagogy in Key Stage 1, talked about that Key Stage 1 team's relationship with early years, leadership relationship with early years and so on, how critical. And this is a similar thing. We need to build those relationships. But from a head perspective, it's what looks good, what feels good, what looks right, and building on that knowledge and understanding. As Matthew was saying, read, explore the research. Because the risk is it can go very badly wrong. We've talked as a team and with other people about that risk of schoolification of early years, and it's something we need to be particularly alert of when we're thinking about 2 and 3 year olds. They are not little 4-year-olds. They are a very special group of children we're working with, and how important it is we recognise that unique phase, but also how we're going to make them feel part of our school community. So it's not like cut adrift on a little island floating away on its own. They are part of our school, but they're a very special part of our school. And I think for a head that can feel quite scary if you're not familiar with in that age group, but we need to find a way of feeling as connected as possible. So doing all the research, talking to people, building that relationship with the areas lead so that everybody's on board, and deepening your understanding of what's different, I think is the critical bit really. And there's lots of people out there to support you with it. So that would be my I suppose, a bit of advice that I would give a teacher.
Super. We've got a question that sort of links on to part of that actually. You mentioned around the space and the environment. And this might be a starting point that many are coming from. That actually they've got that spare classroom and spare space, and that they are looking to then use that to extend their 2-year-old provision. So really, again, let's come back to that point. What would be the starting point then? So if you have got a space available, perhaps a spare classroom, what would you need to consider in terms of the space? Andy, do you want to start us off on this one?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, you've got to think about the practicalities of it and the logistics of it. So just having a spare classroom doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for 2-year-old provision. So before we even get into the actual space that you're going to be using, you've got to think about where does it fit within the school building. You don't really want to have a classroom which is, yes, going to be used for 2-year-old provision, but if parents are picking up and dropping off at different times of the school day, that they can't get into the school building, or they can't get to that particular classroom without disturbing or disrupting other things that are going on within school, which I know sounds like an odd thing to say, but actually you don't really want any of that happening. So you've got to think about actually which room in school is going to be used and how are we going to access that space. Okay, so for drop-offs and pick-ups, etc. We also then, once we get into that room itself, we need to think about the space and, again, the practicalities of that space for young children to be using that area and for staff to be supporting those children. So you'll need to think about, for example, younger children are likely to need a sleep at some point. Okay, so where is that going to happen? And which space of your room is that going to happen? Is it possible to have quieter spaces? Is it possible to think about sleep mats or areas that you can use for sleeping? At the same time, you may well have spaces within that area, within that room or rooms perhaps, that you're going to then need for food. So for meal times perhaps. And how is that going to work in terms of the logistics? So in terms of tables, in terms of chairs, in terms of the right heights of tables and chairs for your children to have. So those practicalities really important. I would also think practically about even just down to the detail of, things like floor surfacing, which sounds again like an odd thing to say, but even within reception classrooms, sometimes, the way that the room has been designed, you've ended up with carpet all the way through, and it's just not practical. Now, it's not practical in reception. It's going to be even less practical when you're working with 2-year-old children. So you've got to think about the practicalities of it. Then think about things like low-level sinks, so that actually, we can access sinks. We can support the children in developing some level of independence there. So yes, so there's that practicality of it. You'd also, of course, need to think about cloakroom spaces. If this is just a one standalone space for your children coming in, you'll probably need, it sounds odd, I know, to say it because we're talking about younger children, but actually younger children actually need generally more space. They are physically, of course, much smaller, but actually they do need more space. More space probably in terms of a cloakroom area, or a space to hang their coats or to have their things, because actually they'll be bringing other things with them, including perhaps nappies, etc. But also alongside that, within the space itself, younger children need more space, and so we need to think about that. We'll come into this in more detail later on as we talk about provision, but the other thing here, to add to what I've already said, is that the provision itself needs to be specific provision, specific to the 2-year-old's age range. So we're not talking about a watered down version of reception practice. We're not talking about even the same furniture very often just being used that you've got in the rest of the school. We've got to be very careful, as Phil said earlier on, about that schoolification of 2-year-olds. And therefore we've got to think really carefully about, is this space that we're going to have, does it feel just like a classroom within reception or year 1, or does it actually feel like 2-year-old provision? And I think we've got to think really carefully about the quality of what we're offering and the specific nature of the needs of 2-year-old children.
Yeah, I think, you've said it all there really, Andy, that it's not about, okay, we've just got a spare classroom and this will be an appropriate space. We have to carefully plan and think about that space, how it is going to be suitable for 2-year-olds, so those 2-year-olds can flourish in that environment. We're not just thinking about that spare space and this will do. It really is important that we're considering down to our provision and our practice what that's going to look like for our 2-year-olds. Absolutely. Lots to consider, isn't there, in that one?
Lots. Yeah.
Could I just say something about the key person element?
Absolutely, Matthew.
And how that becomes even more important, because whilst it's statutory in the EYFS, it kind of very different in reception, when the reception teacher tends to be the key person for all the children, and with a TA, supporting maybe some of those children who are in more need of closer kind of adult time or more adult time. But for 2-year-olds, it's even more important that we have those relationships, those attachments kind of developing, because you're going to potentially be doing things that are quite intimate on a regular basis, like kind of changing nappies, and adults really need to be kind of there as a kind of secure, consistent person that can develop those relationships with the children, because you're going to be doing something like nappy changing and asking children, and kind of getting into the kind of rhythm of a kind of a child's kind of way of being and how they like to be asked to have their nappy changed, when it and that's the kind of subtle things, but if we haven't got those kind of close key person connections, then it can be almost a kind of over to anybody, and we can get into that kind of almost like like a conveyor belt of it's nappy changing time, and we'll just kind of rattle through it kind of thing, rather than having that kind of close nurturing relationship. I think even more important with 2-year-olds, that we kind of that it's recognised that we need to have that time to kind of really develop those kind of positive relationships as kind of the key principles of the EYFS. But that kind of key person approach is kind of so critical, even more critical with 2s, if that's possible.
I would completely echo that, Matthew, and I think it's something important for leadership to be reflecting on, particularly if you've got people on part-time working patterns in your team, and sometimes it might be that the regular key person is not going to be there. So I know sometimes in earlier settings they'll have almost like a key worker team around a group of children, so there's always at least somebody who that child is familiar with. And it's all those logistics of making sure that there's always someone that's got that really good relationship with the child, because it's at the heart of it, isn't it? I always think that relationships and education are just hand in hand. Without it, that child's well-being is going to be impacted. We know what it's like when a child walks in and doesn't see their regular adult anyway. But thinking strategically around, well, okay, if this person only works these days of the week, how can we make sure that there's somebody else that child feels really confident with, particularly when they're first joining our settings well, but not just the child, also the parent as well, parents and carers, because the relationships that, I think it's something that often surprises schools when they first open a 2 and 3 year provision, is the depth of the relationship that the parents have with the staff is very different to the relationship you have with nursery and reception, and certainly as you move through the school. It's much more like you become a family member, and it's how you are going to support those and recognise it's going to happen, but also support them when it moves to transition and those children then moving with the rest of the school, because that relationship will have been very powerful and very strong, and it's how do we kind of nurture that. There was some really interesting research looking at the difference that early years leaders have in their relationships with parents compared with other phase leaders. But I think it's particularly relevant when it comes to 2 and 3 year olds. How do we make those relationships strong between adults and adults and adults and children? I completely agree with Matthew. It has to be a priority right from the very start.
I suppose one of those things when we talk about reading, it's kind of find out about attachment, learn everything that is possibly that you can learn about attachment. I think as you go further up school, often adults become a little bit interchangeable. So adults are taken from year 1 and they're in year 4, and then the next minute they're in year 2, and the next minute you're in year 5. And I think you have to really think seriously about how you're going to deploy adults if you're going to have 2 year olds, because we need to have that kind of consistency. Even if it does become a team, there still has to be that kind of consistency so the children can make these strong attachments. And it's hard if things are always changing or there's unfamiliar adults around.
I totally agree. And I think when we know about child development and that kind of 2 year old window, where we know that they're so sensitive to development in terms of social relationships, emotional control, all these things are really happening in those first 3 years of life. If we keep changing those experiences, it's going to be so hard. And it always takes me back to the original 2 year old funded programme, which was all about the most vulnerable 2 year olds and how critical it is we get the support right. And particularly the adult knowledge around things like attachment. It's so important. And especially for our most vulnerable children who may be having really challenging times beyond school, beyond the settings. How can we make sure what we're providing is the very best? The relationship is at the heart of all that. So as we keep saying, read more and more and more, but also read critically. There is so much stuff out there at the moment, whether it be in a good old-fashioned book or whether it be on social media, that we just need to be really careful. Because often what people put on like an early years spin on it, but actually it's got nothing to do with children under 16. We need to be really, really careful about it, but be open to it. I think as well, our knowledge of what goes on inside children's brains continues to grow and grow and grow, and it's fascinating. But we need to just handle with care, I would always say.
Yeah.
One more thing on the reading front. I know it's out of date now, but it's widely considered one of the best things that was ever produced in the UK is the Birth to 3 Matters document. I know it's old now, but some of the materials in there will still stack up. So if you've got that, if you're thinking of having 2 year olds and you've got that document in a cupboard somewhere, and you dust it down, get it out, hand it out to your team, read it again, remind yourself. I think it is still downloadable in places on the in the internet probably. But I think as a general consensus, then that was one of the better documents that's ever been produced in this country. So and it could be it might prove useful to people again, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about principles, isn't it?
Yes,
over time, there are things that change within early years practice. That there are there's a change of government or a change of framework or whatever it might be. But actually, overall, it's interesting when people sort of work in the early years and then they go off and do other things and then they come back and they speak to me on training. They often will say, I just feel a bit out of date. Well, actually, you're not out of date, are you? you know young children, you know how young children learn. Yeah, you might be out of date in terms of this particular framework, but actually that's something that you can quite fairly quickly get to know. The key thing is that actually you understand how young children learn, how young children develop, and that you understand the needs of young children, and that is the crucial thing in all of this, isn't it? And it's also the reason why you can't just take a year 2 teacher and put that year 2 teacher into your 2-year-old provision. You've got to understand how young children learn. You've really got to really understand this particular age and stage. And the clear message through all of what we're saying here is that 2-year-olds are different. There's a specific nature. Don't just think, oh well, yes, that's my early years teacher, they'll be fine with the 2-year-old children, because your early years teacher will know 4 and 5-year-old children, not 2-year-old practice and provision. And you've got to give them time, and you've got to make sure that they've had that training,
I think they're all really valid points, and something to come back to, isn't it, and considering that the research and what we use to gain that further knowledge, because there is so much on social media, isn't there, and lots of people will automatically go to perhaps social media groups to try and find out more information, and sometimes that's not always related specifically to 2-year-olds. Sometimes that's more general across early years practice. So it does come back to really sound understanding and knowledge about how 2-year-olds function and how they develop well. So making sure that we've really got developmentally appropriate practice for those children then in our 2-year-old provision. So yes, some great advice there from everyone. Super. Right, should we look at our next question then? So it links on to some of this actually. So we thought about gaining that further understanding about what's developmentally appropriate for 2-year-olds. But let's consider the learning environment then. So if you did have 2-year-olds and they were starting in your school-based setting, what would you prioritise in terms of perhaps provision areas for 2-year-olds? Matthew, have you got any thoughts on this one?
I think it's kind of picking up on some of the things Andy and Phil have already said. It's kind of understanding the differences in 2-year-olds between 3, 4 and 5-year-olds, what 2-year-olds need, that kind of need to be kind of active and they move around a lot more potentially than your 3, 4, 5s. I think sometimes we also think because they're smaller they'll need a little bit less space, but because they move around so much and they want to be active, sometimes we need to think in terms of more space rather than less space. And well, I'll come to this in a moment, but some of the kind of provision areas need a little bit more space as well, often. I think starting point is, in this regard, it's kind of similar to your starting points with 3, 4 and 5. It's like, as we always talk about early excellence, it's children's natural desires, what it's understanding what drives young children to learn, and it's things like kind of role playing, building, constructing, representing their world, using the senses, those sorts of things. I think it's always good to come back to those things when we start to build an environment and use those as a bit of a as you kind of weigh into what sorts of areas of provision can we start off with, rather than thinking I've got to replicate everything that might be in a reception class or replicate everything that I might have seen at the school down the road, and think about what you can do really, really well for your 2s, because the resourcing is going to need to be different as well. So it's kind of thinking about that. So starting points, then you probably say like role play is kind of key. It's kind of a cornerstone of all kind of good foundation-based practice, and just as important for 2s as it is for 3s and 4s, because it's what they know. It's what they're kind of driven to do quite naturally. They'll probably be doing it a lot at home. They can bring a lot of those kind of home experiences to their kind of play, and we can kind of construct role play experience that reflect the home as well. So that's one of the things we often talk about, isn't it? Early excellence, that when you're kind of creating environments for role play, you want it to kind of reflect the home as much as you can. I think even more important for 2-year-olds, really, really important for 2-year-olds. I can remember once working in a nursery in London, and they were trying to kind of build on that kind of notion as children kind of transition from one part of their day to the next, so from home to nursery in that instance, and they had a sofa because it was an object that children would recognise from home, and all the children didn't need it, but you certainly saw the younger children, like the children who were between 2 and 3 would come with their parents and just sit on the sofa as the first thing that they did, and it almost like it was that kind of transition for them between home. I'm kind of leaving home behind, but I'm sitting on something that feels very familiar. I can look out to the nursery space and kind of think, I wonder what I'd like to do now, whilst having that kind of reassuring transitional kind of object, in this case a sofa, and from that kind of point there they were able to kind of shift then quite happily into the kind of nursery day. And not all children need that, but lots of children do. So I think that's kind of worth, that's kind of a different thing to when you talk about provision areas generally for as you kind of get into nursery and reception. I don't think we talk in those terms quite so much, but potentially even more important for 2s as a kind of transition from home to school. So yeah, role play experiences, kind of transitional, maybe things that they can connect back to home, and they can see something that's kind of familiar, and that will kind of cues into children's well-being as well, I think. So yeah, role playing I think different for 2s in that it's more kind of nurturing dolly type play. I think they can be overfaced if we have too much of the like for slightly older children, you'll be getting to kind of doing the washing, doing the cleaning, all that kind of things, all those sorts of things. But I kind of think further on, dolly play, baby play, looking after baby, maybe a cooker is enough at this stage, kind of open-ended kind of resources for kind of dress ups and things. But yeah, feeding baby, looking after baby, lots of kind of, and different types of dollies. So the kind of babies that you might have, the kind of like the ones that are kind of posable, but also ones that are kind of softer as well. So you're kind of bringing that kind of softness in for your 2s as well, I think. So that's a long way round of saying role play of the domestic type. I think then if it were me, I'd kind of focus on some kind of construction. And for 2s, because of little hands, you're kind of probably looking more at kind of blocks than small construction. So kind of stick with wooden blocks, kind of unit blocks. Someone help me, what are they called? The ones that are hollow blocks. Thank you very much. My brain kind of picked in there. And I kind of have a nice range of those. And by all means, kind of small world, but it's kind of, again, small world for small hands. So it's kind of more kind of wooden figures than the kind of plastic ones that have more detail on for older children. We don't need quite so much detail for the 2s. And you're kind of thinking constantly about what is going to be manageable. So enough, we are still thinking variety, but we've got 2-year-olds here that are going to need more support to kind of put things away, find things. So we need to have just the right amount of being really careful about the amounts that we offer to 2-year-olds. On that note, one of the other things you talk about would be like a sensory thing. So maybe a water or a sand or a dough. It doesn't necessarily have to be all those, but at least one thing I think that's a very kind of sensory experience. And one of the things that we often talk about, and it often comes to mind when you're thinking about things like water play, is for 2s you need to have things that are the same, because we don't want to kind of set them up to fail. So for example, in a reception class you might have 3 buckets that are different. But for 2-year-olds, there is that kind of law of 2, isn't it? I can't remember. I'm going to butcher it now, but it's kind of, if I saw it yesterday, it's mine. If it's yours, it's mine. If you're using it, it's mine. If I used it last week, it's mine. It's that kind of thing. We need to be kind of careful about not setting 2-year-olds up to fail. So again, a long way around of saying you need to have, like, if you're going to have 3 buckets, they all need to look the same. So that if I want that bucket and I need that bucket, and it's not because I'm being difficult, it's just that for young children, certainly 2-year-olds, that kind of desire to have that thing now can be so overwhelming. Not their fault, it's just where they are developmentally, that we set them up to fail if we don't have, be really careful choices about the sorts of things that we kind of put out for children. So where have we got to? Role play, building instructions, something very kind of sensory. You often see kind of like a gym type area, which is kind of quite a nice thing to have for those children who are really, really active. Depending on if you have outdoor spaces, not so important, but not all 2 rooms that I see certainly have that access to outdoors. That can sometimes be challenging. So some kind of form of indoor gym is often a thing that you see. Andy talked about kind of sleep spaces. I'd say those were the core areas.
Yeah.
One of the things that not so much of an issue for twos is a gathering space, because you might want to have spaces to, or you might want to kind of get them together to sing songs occasionally, but groups and 2-year-olds is not something that kind of goes together so much. I always remember uh, Jenny Linden talked about no more than a sofa full for 2-year-olds, not circles, no more than a sofa full, which I always kind of think is one either side of an adult as a maximum, as a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, I think lots of that comes back to, again, doesn't it, what we've said previously about really understanding how 2-year-olds learn. That we are not trying to then replicate what we might see necessarily in a reception classroom around that whole class gathering space or some of those provision areas. It really is understanding developmental needs of 2-year-olds and ensuring that we really equipped our learning environment to be able to support that.
The other thing that you don't often see in nurseries and reception, I'm on a roll now, sorry guys.
You are.
It's like, in reception and nursery, you kind of talk about, maths and science and that kind of thing, which there's potential, and then at Early Excellence, we kind of offer those kind of areas of provision for twos. But as important, or even more important, to kind of think in terms of heuristic play materials that kind of connect up with kind of babies and treasure baskets, so you've got that kind of transition from treasure baskets into kind of heuristic play. So it's kind of like collections of resources that are kind of shiny or wooden or whatever it might be that children can explore in a very kind of open-ended way alongside an adult. So role of the adult just as important as it always is. I think that's an area of provision that's particular to your twos that you might not find elsewhere in the foundation stage. Not to say it couldn't be used, but kind of vital, you'd say, potentially to 2-year-old. I'll let somebody else have a go.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Yeah, I think what role play, it's interesting you talk a lot about role play, and I think often with 2 and 3-year-olds, they're almost more open-ended than older children because they will turn something else into something else. The block becomes the phone and all those kind of things in the play. And the baby play is really interesting. And again, seeing lots of kind of role play areas in 2 and 3-year-old provision, which are basically a baby clinic. And I wonder if it's almost that closeness that age group have to, I can remember being that almost. It's like, so they're almost playing themselves. It's really interesting. With boxes of nappies in for them to put on and all those kind of things that go on. Everything will end up in the washing machine, whatever you do. If you've got a washing machine, it'll all go in there. There will also, of course, be transporting a lot of things around as well. And it's getting staff to be aware of, it doesn't matter if that gets moved from there. We create a home for things. And that we always talk about that less is more, thinking about things really physical. Also be thinking about the practicalities of keeping things clean. Things are going in the mouths, all those kind of things. So how do you make those things all be safe? I've seen creative areas as well for like that first stage of cutting and sticking and things. Again, thinking about how we're going to support the children with that. And if you are having sort of smaller areas, because sometimes a key group might be together with 3 or 4 children together, but that can be a really lovely cosy experience for using musical instruments, all those kind of things. I have seen some book areas in 2 to 3-year-olds. Again, thinking about the size of the space and where people have photocopied the cover of the book and the children match it up. That's even fun, even if they're not associating with the books with them. And also, for so many of our children, when they're arriving, whether it be in a 2 to 3-year-old provision or 3 to 4 provision, what we're providing in terms of some of the resources may be so alien to them, like nothing to do with what they've ever seen at home before. We need to make sure think about how we're sensible, introducing those resources, modelling how to use them, being really good at play ourselves, and putting ourselves into their shoes, I think. Yeah, I've certainly seen like the gym spaces Matthew talked about with the slopes, all those bits and pieces, or some of those soft play, almost type resources. The space is always going to be the issue, isn't it, really? But also, I know for a lot of 2 and 3-year-old provision, the space has got to be quite flexible. It needs to transform into lunchtime or snack time. It needs to have that capability. So thinking about those practicalities of storage and so on, but not overcomplicating the space. I think that is often the risk. We want to make a space that's amazing for our children and so on. I think it's Matthew, you talk about we have a risk of turning our early years environments into wedding venues if we're not careful. It all becomes about an adult aesthetic. We need to remember these are young children, it's their place of work, so not overcomplicating it. They do definitely need more space. I mean, statutorily, you've got to provide more space for 2-year-olds than you do to 4-year-olds. There is a change in there. But they're literally learning where their body ends, that proprioception. So they do walk around, they do stumble, they do trip, they do bump and collide into each other. The sharing thing I always find fascinating, and it's that early stages of learning how to share. And of course, some of the children arrive able to do that because perhaps they've been, older siblings, they've learned how to do it. For others, I've never had to share a single thing in my life. And suddenly I've got to wait a little bit for something. Really hard for them. But I do also think it's really important to have those conversations with your nursery team and to be thinking about, well, okay, if we're going to have a block area with some small world, what's the difference between what we've got in this area and in our older children, but also what's the similarities that's going to help with that transition process. There's been some really interesting work done with some schools where have got 2 and 3 year olds, where they've literally got all of one set of resource out. They've got all their small world out, going from 2-year-olds to reception, and really thought about, oh my goodness, why have we got that there? Why have we got there? It doesn't make sense, because often things get moved around or inherited, or someone donates something. Before you know it, it's all a bit of a mishmash. And that's really hard then when you're thinking more strategically about how do we make this one better journey for everybody all the way through. Outdoors is often a real challenge. One of the things I think sometimes perhaps within a school environment is that maybe a better option that they do actually have the outdoors sometimes. And if it's going to be a shared outdoors with your 3 and 4 year olds, you might have to think really carefully about which resources they're going to be able to access when they're 2 year olds, or are they going to have some dedicated spaces for them? Because a 4-year-old can be pretty intimidating when you're 2 in terms of like their confidence and familiarity, but also can a 2-year-old when they're very confident. So we need to think about how to introduce that. Again, not overcomplicating it. There is always that risk of just too much stuff, that they need the people is what they need, and they need the time and the space to go and enjoy those things. So I love those environments. Are fantastic. That I always think 2-year-olds are the most honest people on the earth, because they've learned no social etiquette. They will tell you bluntly what it's like, how it is. You'll see straight away where they're going. You'll also see where they're not going. And they're very clearly telling you that's a waste of time what you put there. You just need to watch them rather than try and dictate what they're going to be doing all the time. And spend a bit of time. I meant to say, when we talk about head teachers, as soon as you get that 2-year-old provision, if ever you want to recharge your education batteries or soul, go and spend time with 2 and 3-year-olds. Because they'll just remind you why you do what you do, and they will bring you down to earth very, very quickly in the best possible way. So that would always be my advice.
Yeah.
And one of the things with twos is it's kind of, well, it's like everything, isn't it? It's kind of knowing what children are most likely to do with a kind of chosen set of resources. So you're kind of thinking with blocks for 2-year-olds, the greatest likelihood is they're going to be quite experimental of what is a block, what can I make a block do. They're going to be lining them up, stacking them. So that's the sort of blocks that you need to kind of enable that play. And the chances are, while they're in that kind of stage of development, that's kind of where it's going to sit. So you don't need like a huge variety of different types of blocks. You just you kind of need a kind of standard collection of kind of unit blocks that are kind of cuboids and cubes, and because that's kind of will demonstrate your understanding of what's likely to happen and what children are likely to do with those resources. So you don't need as much variety, like kind of Phil was talking about. Also, on the reading point of view, I think Phil alluded to a little bit earlier, children will transport things, which was just alluding to children's schema. And if you don't know about schema already, and you're thinking about having twos, then you really do need to start to do some work on read up about kind of schema, and start with that Sally Featherstone book again and again. Would be a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really powerful stuff. Getting to know schemas will really help your practice. I thought it was really interesting. We sort of started there with sort of Matthew talking about that idea of getting to know the children's, sort of almost building on their home experience in terms of having a sofa, having things that are familiar to the children within the environment, which is absolutely right. And then we kind of have grown from that into what Phil was then saying, which was that actually you've also got to think about where that 2-year-old provision sits within school as well. And so you're talking about kind of building up from the home environment, and also like down from the reception and nursery, and then down into your 2-year-old provision. And I think actually probably the perfect 2-year-old provision builds on both of those ideas, doesn't it? That you've got that link between home and the 2-year-old environment, and you're building on their previous experiences. At the same time, you've got a really clear understanding about how does this 2-year-old provision fit into the rest of our school, So what comes next in terms of nursery provision? What comes next in terms of reception provision? It struck me from just what you were saying, Phil, as well, that that's such a great CPD opportunity for your early years team as a whole. If you're looking at 2-year-old provision, then you've got a nursery team, haven't you? So you've got reception and nursery team already. You've got probably quite a large early years team already, and now you're looking at 2-year-old provision. Therefore, I would recommend that actually you do look at that idea of looking at this whole team and looking at actually what if we take one provision area. So if we take a water area, what does that look like in reception? What resources are going to be available? Why is it like that in reception? Then look at that within nursery and say, right, what does that look like in nursery? And why is that the same, or why is it different to reception? And in what way is it the same, and in what way is it different? And that doesn't mean to say it has to be always different at all, but there are likely to be subtle differences alongside many similarities. Then, of course, we go from that nursery provision into 2-year-old provision, and again, where are the similarities, where are the differences? And what we're looking for is some continuity and progression going through from each of those age ranges. So it shouldn't look, like a completely fresh start every time you move from one age range to the other and starting again, because otherwise, you're making that very difficult for your children and your staff. But at the same time, we should understand why actually we might be offering 3 different buckets in reception, but offering maybe similar objects, as Matthew mentioned, as we are there within nursery. And where's the middle ground? How are we building on that? So yeah, it struck me that the conversations that you'll gain from that with your early years team will then equip your early years team very well for being able to talk about your curriculum offer for your children throughout the early years. Whereas if you just sort of almost land 2-year-old provision in there and it almost just sits there separate, you won't get those links, you won't get those connections, and you will probably lose that ownership. Your early years leader will probably lose that ownership of what goes on across the whole of the space. And yet I think the understanding that goes with it, if you do it well, the understanding of talking through with everybody about what are we offering at what stage, I think that can really support your practice very well.
That makes some really great links, actually, Andy, to our next question that was around curriculum. As a setting, we're asking, were there any examples of where schools have started to develop their curriculum starting from 2-year-olds? And I think you've already started that conversation where we're thinking about the continuity and progression. Phil, have you got anything more to add around that? So if they were, having 2-year-olds starting in their school, what would that curriculum development then look like starting from 2?
Yeah, I think, again, it kind of builds on what Andy was just been saying. And I think all the way through, it's recognising the uniqueness of that age group. So you're not trying to force them into a different kind of model of learning and a different kind of, I suppose, you need to think about what is special about that particular phase. But what's been really interesting working with some schools who have developed their curriculum is the amount of conversation cross-phase that has developed, not just from early years phase, but really going through to Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2. It's like, oh my goodness, this is really where it begins. And it's whenever I've looked at their kind of curriculum journeys that they've mapped out, say for geography, for example, for across the whole of the school. I'm thinking of one in particular, which we've done a lot of work with, Wilbury, who team kind of know quite well, based in Edmonton, where they really thought about what are the first steps to becoming almost a geographer, and realising how much learning really is going on when you're 2 and 3, and that discovery, you're discovering the world as part of that thing. And then they thought more broadly about, well, what's special about growing up as a child in this particular community? What's it like for a 2-year-old? What's it like for a 4-year-old? What's it like for a 6-year-old? That kind of longer journey for those children. Things about core resources that are going to be available in provision. But they also thought about the EYFS as a phase in itself. So what is it by the end of the EYFS we want for our children, rather than what do we want at each particular phase? So they thought long term, but also short. And they've done a great deal of work. It's a number of years they've worked on this together, and reviewing it and reflecting it. What was also interesting is looking at that provision in that particular school. You go into the room and you know that 2-year-old provision is for 2-year-olds. There's no doubt about it. It oozes 2-year-olds. But there are also little subtleties that reminds you that you're in that school. So the way they've chosen to organise certain things using certain colours is the same through the EYFS, so that children are supported with musicians. So there's all those little subtleties going on. So it's that broader curriculum. It's not just, you know, your maths, your literacy. It's the wider experiences that are being provided for those children. But they've done a great deal of work. Again, drop us a line, get in touch, and we can kind of point you in lots of directions, because lots of people have been doing this. Of course, driven partly by the current inspection framework. It's that thinking about your curriculum. The other people, of course, that we need to support and hold the hands of a lot through this are subject leaders. Because you can imagine, if you're, you know, you're the maths lead in the school, you've only ever taught above year 3, suddenly someone is saying, well, now our 2-year-olds are part of that conversation around curriculum. That could be quite daunting. So no one is expecting those people to be an expert in working with 2 and 3-year-olds. But to be able to recognise that this is where it begins, this is that journey within our school of children becoming more confident with mathematics, for example. If we think back to the recent Ofsted report, Best Start in Life, and part 3 talks about specific areas, and one thing it talks about is children having positive attitudes to mathematics. Now, I've never met a 2-year-old who doesn't have a positive attitude towards number and counting and so on. They don't think in that kind of way. It's older children and adults. So if we want to think about having children who are enthusiastic mathematicians, we should be looking to our youngest children, because they already are. There's something else we're doing a bit later on that stops them from feeling like that. So I think it goes back to that vision idea. When you're thinking about your vision, you've got to think about that kind of curriculum conversation. And of course, through all of that, you've got to be thinking about the child's curriculum as well. If you haven't read it, thoroughly recommend Child at the Heart, Starting from the Child, Julie Fisher's latest edition, version 5, talks about curriculum, and particularly that relationship between our curriculum or the statutory curriculum and the child's curriculum, and that natural curiosity, that drive that young children have to explore and to discover, and how when you get them working really well together, you end up with really powerful learning opportunities. So I think, again, back to what Matthew and Andy are saying, and I've been saying, read, look at other people's examples, draw on some of the things like Birth to Life Matters, Development Matters, which are curriculum documents. It's what they were designed to do, but draw on the expertise of your team and that local uniqueness, and again, find out some people who are doing it nearby to yourselves. But curriculum can be still quite overwhelming, quite daunting, and we know there's a big curriculum review going on at the moment that's not involving early years. Some might say that's a good thing, it's not involving. Other people are kind of like, well, why have we been left out again? But I think we need to keep having a conversation about what we're doing for these children now and why. What's different about the way we're supporting children, but what do we fundamentally know about the way young children learn? And that alliance between pedagogy and curriculum has to be critical. I feel myself getting a bit excited about talking about it, but it's back to that adult knowledge, because if the adult has that knowledge, then in their interaction, they can pull on their knowledge of child development, knowledge of that unique child and their interests, and the knowledge of how that moment is going to be a teachable moment, that kind of responsible, reflective kind of teaching. It's like, okay, responsive teaching, I've noticed this child needs this now. This is what I'm going to do to support them next, and that's what's right for that child. So a really flexible curriculum, that's been a key message very much actually from Ofsted recently, is we can't have this rigid curriculum, it's not working, we've got to be much more flexible. And we're not going to talk about particularly in this conversation, but also because we need to be mindful that some of the children joining our schools as 2 and 3-year-olds could have really complex additional needs. So that's another layer of expertise we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about environment, curriculum, adult knowledge, our Senkos, how are we supporting all of these people? It's such a big conversation, but it all needs to be had, I suppose.
Just kind of thinking, picking up on what Phil was talking about curriculum, obviously for 2s, it's going to be prime areas going to be focus. And Phil also was talking about those kind of subject leaders, and it's an interesting conversation just to be happening, or to have in schools, kind of who's responsible for the implementation of the prime areas, because they don't kind of sit along, in the same kind of way as the subject leaders from the national curriculum do. It's obviously going to come, normally it was going to sit in the lap of the early years foundation stage leader, but that's I think that's the kind of conversation just kind of worth worth having in the school, because certainly for your twos, then the prime areas are going to be key. And I think it's one of the lovely things about having twos. Hopefully, would take you back to those principles as Phil was talking about, and the importance of the starting with a unique child, and hopefully thinking about twos will take you back to those principles. And just kind of picking up what Phil's saying with Julie Fisher's starting with the child, she talks about, and kind of what Andy was talking about with progression within the curriculum. She talks about needing to think about progression in three ways: child development, areas of learning development, and through the areas of provision as well, like Andy was talking about. And I think they're kind of key when you're kind of thinking about curriculum design as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
completely
I was
agree
going
with
to
you.
add as well that I think particularly, I mean, right the way across the EYFS, but particularly, I think it's often an issue within work with 2-year-olds, is that you've got to look carefully at what the children are naturally interested in doing, and in that holistic way, look really closely at, well, what's the learning that's happening within that. And so, as Matthew mentioned earlier on, schematic play is incredibly powerful for young children. 2-year-old children will fill things up, tip things out, line things up, stack things up, transport things, etc. And when you really look closely at what's happening, there are loads of opportunities for mathematics within it. But you have to be open to the idea that actually what you're seeing here is a child who is working out the world around them, and there are elements of mathematics within that, there's elements of understanding the world within that, there's elements of all sorts of different things. You won't neatly be able to timetable it. You'll have to really look closely at what's happening when that child is exploring in a very holistic way. The other thing that I think is an important thing to add to what we've already said is that around the curriculum, I would want a clear idea of what is being learned. So what are we aiming for here, as Phil was saying, but also alongside that, I'd want to have a really clear understanding of those characteristics of effective learning. So that alongside it, what we've got is we understand, and again, this is something that you could do across your early years team or beyond, but you could work together and say, right, well, how do we know that effective learning is happening here? What will it look like in terms of the level of engagement? What will it look like? What does effective learning at a 2-year-old age and stage look like? I think is an important thing to consider, because unless you're clear in your mind, how can you possibly say we've got effective practice here if you don't have a clear idea of what effective learning looks like for 2-year-olds? You can't be clear that you've got effective practice, I think. So be really clear about it, have those conversations, really observe and watch the children. Where are you seeing effective learning? What does it look like for 2-year-old provision? What does it look like for 3 and 4-year-old children? But also beyond that as well, I think it's an important conversation to have.
I completely agree,
Just
Andy.
kind of thinking about what.
Again,
Oh, go on, sorry,
sorry,
Tom.
Matthew. I was going to say, I think again it's back to that expert adult knowledge, and it's what. So if we're introducing early concepts, are we secure in our own understanding of early concepts? Because the risk is we build a wobbly foundation very quickly for young children. And it's been, some of the concerns have been raised about adults who are working with 2 and 3-year-olds is they understand mathematical development, but for a 4-year-old and for a 5-year-old, and they're using that knowledge to support the 2-year-old. They're not understanding what's actually happened before, and it's really hard to develop that knowledge. It comes from experience and training and CPD and so on. But I think, yeah, definitely the prime areas, and that's again a strong message for also for school leaders. So school leaders got that responsibility of checking who is monitoring the prime areas, what's adult knowledge in the prime areas, particularly for that age group, what's adult knowledge in the characteristics of learning, but from a senior leader perspective, what is your understanding of characteristics? Absolutely critical. And alongside that, we would always shout out for the Leuven scales. Are people looking at things like well-being and involvement? But as Andy was saying, what does it look like for that age? It's going to look different. So, a high level involvement for a 2-year-old looks a bit different for a high level of involvement for a 4-year-old. And it's kind of just not that broad brush approach. We need to specialise, I guess, is the key message.
That kind of takes it back to schema again, doesn't it?
What's
it going to look like?
Yeah,
So often when children who are 2 are deeply involved, they're still kind of moving around an awful lot. Whereas
Yeah.
as you get a little bit older, often when you're deeply involved, you're a bit more still. And there's kind of more kind of closer to how an adult would look when they're um, so yeah, the importance of schema then takes you back to we've talked about relationships, important relationship with parents, and schematic play can be for parents, if you don't understand it, quite a frustrating thing. I think that can be really powerful for us as practitioners to be able to kind of share knowledge with parents, and it can really kind of help them understand their children and kind of relax into it a bit more, and that they're not just doing these things to frustrate us. It's like it's an inner drive that they kind of can't help. It's the way they're finding out about the world, and just kind of opening the lid on that for lots of parents can be a real eye opener and a relief for lots of parents. But also kind of builds that professional relationship and that relationship that we have with the parents, which is all the more important when we're kind of working with those very youngest children, I think.
We've already touched on quite a few of these key elements that will help us answer the next question. We've alluded a lot to, really understanding how children learn, that key role that the adults go into play, and that sound knowledge that the adults and the team will need to know about what is developmentally appropriate for 2-year-olds. So one of the questions that has come in on one of our social media platforms was around a reception teacher, very knowledgeable and experienced of teaching reception, but they've been asked to now go and be the teacher in our 2-year-old provision. What else do we need to equip this teacher with in terms of understanding what they need to find out or know about? Do we want to add any more points to that?
Yeah, I think talk to someone who's doing it. Go and visit somewhere. I would always recommend. I mean, I love, we're very lucky. We get to visit lots and lots of different schools and settings. But sometimes in your own school, that's more difficult. So I think, but if you're in a trust, talk to your early years lead. This is somewhere you could go and go. If you're a maintained school, go and visit your local authority and talk to them. But I think going and seeing and talking to someone who's working with that age group is so valuable in lots of
Yeah,
ways. As we've been saying,
yeah,
read, read, read. Have a
yeah,
look on the Education Endowment Foundation website. There's a myriad of resources, and of course, all the early years evidence stuff that came as part of the Stronger Practice projects. That's specifically aimed at 0 to 4. So there's lots of things in there that people can draw on. But I think, read, reflect, listen to podcasts, do all kinds of things. But most importantly, be really clear about what you want it to look like. How's it going to feel? Work really closely with the wider school team as well. And it's the parent relationship that's going to be absolutely critical. I think it is so powerful with that age group because they're giving you the most precious thing in their life, those parents, and it's like
yeah,
so they're trusting you with these children. So we need to make sure we've got the best possible knowledge to support them, but also recognise some days it's not going to go as well as you want it to do. Children are unpredictable, adults are unpredictable. There's going to be those moments you're going to laugh a lot. You're also going to despair probably sometimes as well. Things aren't working, but to review, to reflect, and to share with us what you've been doing is what I would recommend. We love hearing what people are up to, whether it's through social media or people just dropping an email. We love seeing photographs of your environments. So people are amazingly creative at making inspiring places for children, and that's what those spaces are. Yes, adults love looking at them, but they're for children. So how is it going to work for them?
yeah,
And
yeah,
get a lot as much sleep as you can would be my advice. Sorry, but yeah. I mean, I particularly be thinking about the relationships with parents and how working with them is going to be slightly different. It's going to be much closer. That's going to be a big thing to think about. Just thinking more broadly, what we're seeing is the kind of the fulcrum of the primary school is starting to tilt slightly. So for some of us, when we joined school, there was only a reception class, for example. So you were the only early years person in the school. Everything else was tilted towards national curriculum. What we're seeing is a slight tipping potentially the other way, where in some schools, a third of the school is going to become early years. That's going to be really powerful because for many early years teams in schools or early years teachers, you're on your own. You're there on your own and that's it. We're thinking about some of our smaller schools particularly. But what is starting to happen is this kind of twitch is starting to happen, which is quite empowering, I think, in some ways. But we also do need to be alert of that schoolification risk. And I think particularly when you've taught in reception, this teacher was asking a question about, is you're not trying to create a mini reception. It needs to feel different, but there can be some commonalities. But it's thinking it slightly differently, because the risk is you just dilute. I think Andy said very early on, we talked about the risk of diluting reception. You're not diluting reception. Just as when we talk about using kind of earlier sort of pedagogy as part of the strategy in Key Stage 1, you're not just replicating reception, because we see it goes wrong when that sort of happens. What you are doing is thinking about the commonalities, the similarities, but you're looking at it through a 2-year-old lens, not just kind of like the little versions of reception children. And I think that can be a bit of a shock sometimes. Even thinking about teachers who've moved from Key Stage 2 to working in Year 1, and they often try and work in a similar way to the way that they worked in Year 1, in Key Stage 2, and it's like, it's not the same, even though you're following national curriculum. So I think thinking about it differently, but enjoying it, I think would be the key.
That's a really interesting point you raised, Phil. I wondered if you could support a little bit more around what if there was mixed age classes then, or mixed age provision. What would we look at in supporting that? We've had a few questions around mixed age provision.
Yeah, I mean, and we're seeing it more and more, aren't we? Not just in early years, and we do particular support for kind of Key Stage 1 mix and reception mix, and we know with some early years provision, you will financially, it's something that people have to do. Ideally, you would not be choosing to mix 2 and 3 year olds with your 4 and 5 year olds and so on, because their needs are quite different. So, and particularly if you're starting new doing it, we would not say this is a good thing to do. However, some people have to do it, and sometimes people do it really successfully. But again, that's drawing on expertise, looking at different examples of it, thinking really carefully about things like the resources. You've got implications about safety and so on for different age groups. How are children going to access things independently? You're going to have some children, if you've got 4 year olds as well as your 2 year olds, some of those children are going to be really skillful using some quite interesting resources. Thinking of woodwork areas, all kinds of things going on. So we need to think really carefully about it. But sometimes the option not to do it is not there. So it's kind of really going back to that vision, isn't it? Well, if we're going to be mixed, more like a family environment, I suppose, really. How do we manage our own family when we've got all kind of mixed ages of children? How do we keep everybody safe? Nobody missing out. I think that's always my worry with any mixed age classes. Is everyone getting the very best out of it, or is somebody getting the lighter version? And the last thing you want is the 2 year olds basically stuck in the corner. We never want to see that. So yeah, I think it's a challenge. It really is a challenge, but we know that some schools have done it really successfully, and some nurseries have done it really successfully.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you were saying. Yeah, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have 2 year old children with 3 and 4 year old children, or with a mixed, even a broader mix. You would really, in an ideal world, you're aiming to meet the needs of the individual children, and whilst you can do that to a certain extent with nursery and reception children together, it gets much more challenging, I think, because of the diverse needs when you start to then add 2 year olds into that. So I think you've got to keep them separate. In terms of 2 year old children, you've got to be aware, of course, as we mentioned earlier on, of the different needs at different times in the day. So things like changes to nappies, things like sleep times and food times and things like that. The different needs of the children, I think, will generally mean that you would need to keep them separate. And if you are going to have them together, you really do need skilled staff, and staff who are confident and have a clear vision of what it will look like to be able to do it. And often people don't have that when they're just starting out. So I think it does come with a bit of a word of warning, I think. Really,
I think if it is something that you're listening to this and you're thinking, but this is the way we're going to have to go, then get in touch with us, because there are examples that certainly I know of 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s all being together, and it's working really well, and it's kind of a well kind of established setting that have been doing it for a few years. So sometimes it's a kind of a needs and must, isn't it? It would be lovely if you could separate them all up, but sometimes you have to. And if you have to, and you're kind of thinking, how do we start to get our head around this? Then, contact us, and we can, I'm sure, point you in the direction of somebody who can give you an example of how they're making it work.
Brilliant. Lots of sound advice there, covering so many different topics. So hopefully that's given our listeners just a snippet of some of the information that they could go away and further research. Of course, if you do want any further support, do get in contact with us at Early Excellence. There is a wealth of information on our website, earlyexcellence.com, to support from leadership down to practitioners. So lots of information there to go away and research, but also do get in contact with us personally. All of our emails are at earlyexcellence.com using our first name, and they'll be at the end of the round table. So we hope that's given you lots of opportunities and ideas to explore your provision with 2-year-olds and your practice further. Thank you for listening, everyone.